This week, we're going to be fixing a very specific problem with our photo editing. I was using a very wide-angle lens recently, the new Canon RF 14mm f1.4 lens. A lovely lens, but a wide-angle lens can be very difficult to capture things that are a bit further away. And that was the case that we had this time. A difficult exposure, a difficult situation when you only have a 14mm lens with you. We had some very, very lovely light. I was very lucky with that. A beautiful landscape, but it was very difficult to capture in that moment. I took the photo anyway. I kind of did my best with the exposure, which again was a little bit tricky anyway as well. We're going to see how we can fix this up in Lightroom Classic. We're probably going to be using a mixture of all kinds of different tools, masking, color grading, probably some white balance adjustments as well, and I would imagine some pretty heavy cropping. I was using the Canon R6 III, so we have got a bit of resolution there to play with. Let's dive into it. It's Tutorial Tuesday. Welcome back to Tutorial Tuesday, where each week and every Tuesday we bring you a brand new, fresh photography tutorial. Let's dive into Lightroom Classic and start working on this photo. Right, this is the photo we're going to be working with in Lightroom Classic. There's a few things we need to sort out here. First of all, there's a lot of foreground. Right, it's a very wide angle lens, so we're probably going to do some heavy cropping there. We need to do some stuff here with the exposure. Right, it's a little bit of a tricky exposure. We've got some beautiful light over on these hills, which I really like, but the sun is right here, so that's obviously a bit blown out. And, you know, some of the other areas are a bit in shadow. So we need to do a few things with this photo. The first thing I'm actually going to do, before I crop, actually, I'm going to bring those highlights down and bring the shadows up, just so we can see a little bit more about what we're actually doing here. And I'm just going to warm the photo up a touch as well. Okay, immediately that looks a little bit better. I'm going to bring the clarity up a little bit and the texture and maybe a little bit of vibrance. Not too much, though. Now we're going to go into the cropping tool. I think this is going to look best as a 16:9. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And I'm actually going to bring this right down to something like that. I think I want the hills to be kind of along this bottom part of sort of rule of thirds there. Let's take a look at that. That looks pretty good. And we probably need to straighten this up a touch as well. It looks like the horizon is a little bit wonky. I'm actually going to come down to the transform tab here and click auto. And Lightroom's going to do what it thinks is best. Actually, that looks really good. I think that's kind of worked out pretty well. Now we've got a nice interesting sky here, which is good. And actually, I think the whole thing looks quite nice. And immediately, we've already made quite a big difference. If I press the backslash key on the keyboard, we can see how far we've already come. So this is where we started, and this is where we've got to. Now, what we have lost is a little bit of the atmosphere that was kind of prevalent on these hills. But we can recapture that a little bit. We just had to kind of get where we've got to now to really kind of find our footing. Probably time to move into the masking panel, and I'm going to start with a linear gradient from the bottom up. I'm going to push our viewer's eye to these hills by just darkening this foreground. So linear gradient up from the bottom. I'm just going to darken that exposure, something a little bit like that. I'm going to go ahead and do another mask. We'll do a radial gradient this time, and I'm going to do something like this just across these hills. So something like that. I'm going to bring that exposure up a little bit. Bring the white level up a little bit. I'm going to come down and just bring that dehaze down a touch so we get a little bit of that kind of misty feel to things. I think that looks quite nice. We're going to go ahead and do another radial gradient, this time around where the sun is, something a little bit like this. I'm going to bring that exposure up just a touch, warm it up just a touch, and a little bit of negative dehaze as well. So something a little bit like that, which I think looks quite nice. Let's look at a before and after again. So this is where we started. This is where we've got to. I think that looks quite nice. You know, I think we're still getting a little bit of that atmosphere, but we've just got a bit more detail in the shot, which I think looks really good. Now, there's a few different ways we could take it now. We can start working a little bit with the sky. We can start really shaping the light on these hills. For example, I might come in and actually use a brush here. I want to bring that exposure up. I'm going to possibly do that too much, but we'll see. And I want to actually try and brush onto these hills a little bit of positive exposure. So something a little bit like that. There we go. A little bit like that as well. I think that actually looks quite nice. And then we can go ahead and do another brush. This time we're going to darken things. And I want to just paint over some of these areas where we've got a bit more shadow. So something like this, and a little bit on that part of the hill as well. Now, if you press O on the keyboard, you can see where these masks are applied. And because we're using a reasonably low flow here, so the slider for flow is at 29, we can sort of paint over these areas and build them up. As you can see, the more I paint over, the sort of stronger that mask is becoming. Now that looks quite nice. Let's actually just reduce how much it's bringing the exposure down, but that's really adding to the contrast of the scene. In fact, if I was to go into the global sliders and just bring the contrast up, I actually think that makes the photo pop a little bit more as well, which is quite nice. Now, I want to do something with the sky. I'm not entirely sure where I want to go with it at the moment. So what I'm going to do is take a look at the presets over on the left. Now, these adaptive presets, which you can see here, adaptive sky will mask the sky and apply all kinds of different looks to just that. Some of these are a bit much, frankly, and don't work. I mean, look at that, for example. And some of these don't work so well for specific photos. This one's obviously not going to work so well for this one. But if I was to come down to something like golden hour, it's a bit strong, but it could work, right? That's something that we might be able to make work. But I quite like something like sunrise, which is a little bit softer. Maybe sunset, but I don't think it's going to work for this one so much. Let's take a look. No, not so much. But sunrise, I think, could work. So I'm going to click on sunrise for now. I'm going to come up and I'm just going to bring the amount that's being applied down to something like maybe 60%. Now, if I come over to the masking panel, you can now see there's a new mask applied, sunrise, which is essentially a sky mask, and Lightroom is applying different effects to it. So it's adjusting things like the warmth and the saturation. What I might do is actually just come in here and just bring in a linear gradient into the sky, something a little bit like this. And what I want to do really is darken a little bit of the top of that sky. So I'm gonna come in, just bring that exposure down, something a little bit like that. I don't want to go too crazy with it, but I think this big cloud here, that's going to kind of help. Okay, that looks quite nice. Let's look at the before and after of this photo. So this is where we started. This is where we've taken it to. We've warmed that up quite nicely. We've really played around with that quite a bit. Let's come down to the hue, saturation, and luminance tab here. So in the hue area, I'm going to bring that orange down a little bit, just sort of make that a little richer. The yellows down a little bit, just sort of make that a little bit closer to the oranges. And I don't think we need to do much with the greens, but if I was to bring it towards the yellows, I think that'd probably help just to sort of unify the colors that are in this photo. Let's come down to saturation as well. I might bring the greens down a little bit, the yellows down just a touch as well, just to kind of help with things. And then lastly, what I might do is actually come up here to the tone curve. This can be a really useful way to apply some contrast to the image. I'm going to put a point here in the kind of lower, the shadowy area. I'm just going to bring that down a little bit. And then we'll put another point here, more sort of in the mid-tone, and bring that back up just a touch. Now, I don't want to go too crazy with this, but I really quite like the way that affects the photo. I think that looks quite good. If I was to bring the highlights up, I think that looks that's too much now. So I'm not going to go too crazy with that. I might even bring those down just a touch. But I think this way we get an interesting kind of feel to these hills, which have the light kind of spilling onto them. I think that looks really nice. The last thing I might do is just come back to this mask around the sun here and actually just bring that negativity haze down even more to really give the feeling of sunlight kind of spilling out of that area, which I think looks really nice. Now, have I gone a bit too far with the contrast? I actually think it looks really nice personally. That's going to be a personal preference, I suppose. Let's look at the before and after. This is where we started. So difficult exposure. You know, we've cropped it quite a lot as well, so we're not really seeing the crop here. In fact, I'll show you a full before. This is what the photo would have looked like before we even started. And then this is where we've taken it to, which I'm really quite happy with, actually. I think that it looks lovely. We had some beautiful light. It kind of shows off those hills. We've got a nice, interesting sky there, lovely sort of sunset. I'm actually really happy with this. I'd love to know if there's something you would have done differently with this photo. We've used a lot of different tools here within Lightroom, which is quite fun. But is there something you would have done differently? Would you have maybe stopped a little bit early? Would you have gone a little bit further? Would you have done something different with the way of shaping the light? Obviously, the perfect situation for me would have been able to come back with a longer lens. And absolutely, that is something I might explore in the future. But, you know, the light was exactly the way it was in that moment. It was the only lens I had. And, you know, it actually, with the R6 III, I had absolutely enough resolution to be able to crop that and get a photo that I am actually really happy with. So that's nice as well. Sometimes the lens you have is the best lens that is available to you. And because it's a Canon L lens as well, it's lovely and sharp, and we have cropped in and still retained an enormous amount of detail, which is fantastic. Now you can check out that new Canon RF 14mm f1.4 L lens over at parcameras.com, as well as the R6 III. They'll pop links down in the description for you to go and check those out to make it super easy, as well as all the equipment we use for all these videos, as well as all down in the description of this video. Of course, don't forget to like and subscribe to us. There's new content all the time. I will see you in the next video, but until then, as always, thanks for watching.